Nobody in the small town of Riverside had ever seen a child like Lily. At just 8 years old, her fingers moved across piano keys like magic. Teachers at the music school would stop whatever they were doing just to listen when she practiced. Parents would whisper to each other in the hallways, wondering how someone so young could make a piano sound like it was singing. Lily's mom worked as a nurse at the local hospital, doing double shifts most weeks. Her dad taught math at the community college. They weren't rich and they weren't famous. They were just regular people who happened to have a daughter with an extraordinary gift. When Lily was 4, she had climbed onto the piano bench at her grandmother's house and started playing a song she had only heard once on the radio. Her grandmother called her son immediately, her voice shaking with excitement. From that day forward, music became Lily's whole world. While other kids played video games or watched cartoons, she would sit at their old upright piano for hours, teaching herself songs by ear. Her parents saved every extra dollar they had to pay for proper lessons at the Riverside Academy of Music. The academy was the best music school in 3 counties, and getting accepted there was considered a huge honor. By the time Lily turned 8, she had already won 5 regional competitions. The walls of their small living room were covered with certificates and ribbons. But Lily never seemed to care about the awards. She would usually forget about them the moment she received them. What she cared about was the music itself. She would talk about songs the way other kids talked about their favorite movies, describing how different notes made her feel different emotions. Mrs. Patterson, the director of the Music Academy, saw something special in Lily from the very first day. She was a strict woman in her 60s who had spent her entire life around talented musicians. She had taught hundreds of students, but she said Lily was different. She told Lily's parents that their daughter had the kind of talent that only appeared once in a generation. The spring recital was the biggest event of the year at the Academy. It was held at the Grand Theater downtown, the one with red velvet seats and crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Everyone who was anyone in the local music community would be there. Parents, teachers, music critics from the city newspaper, and even scouts from prestigious music schools would attend to see the young performers. This year, Mrs. Patterson made a bold decision. She wanted Lily to perform a piece by Rachmaninoff, one of the most difficult composers in classical music history. The piece was so complex that most professional pianists would think twice before attempting it. Some of the other teachers thought Mrs. Patterson was making a mistake. They worried that putting such pressure on an 8-year-old could backfire. But Mrs. Patterson insisted. She believed Lily was ready to show the world what she could do. Lily practiced the piece every single day for 3 months. Her fingers would sometimes hurt from the hours of repetition, but she never complained. She loved the challenge. The music was like a puzzle that she was slowly solving, one measure at a time. Her parents would hear her playing late into the evening, the complex melodies drifting through their small house. The night before the recital, something strange happened. Lily was practicing in the Academy's main hall after everyone had gone home. Her mom was waiting in the car outside, scrolling through her phone while her daughter finished one last practice session. Lily was playing through the piece for what felt like the 100th time when suddenly she stopped. She sat there at the piano, completely still, her hands frozen above the keys. The silence in the empty hall was deafening. Then she started playing again, but this time it was different. She played just a few notes, but they weren't from the piece she had been practicing. They were something else entirely, something that sounded both beautiful and somehow impossible. She did this several times, playing these strange, compressed bursts of sound that lasted only a second or two each. It was as if she was trying to squeeze an entire song into a single moment. After about 10 minutes of this unusual experimentation, she suddenly packed up her sheet music and left. She seemed distracted, almost confused as she walked to the car. Her mom asked if everything was okay. Lily just nodded and said she was tired. But that night she barely slept. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts about music that she couldn't quite put into words. The next evening arrived faster than anyone expected. The theater was packed with over 300 people. Lily's parents sat in the front row, her mother clutching her father's hand so tightly that his fingers started to turn white. They were proud but also terrified. They had seen the piece Lily was about to perform, and they knew how difficult it was. Lily wore a simple white dress that her grandmother had bought for the occasion. She looked so small as she walked across the massive stage toward the grand piano that sat in the spotlight. Her footsteps echoed in the silent theater. Every eye in the building was focused on this tiny girl who was about to attempt something that seemed impossible for her age. She reached the piano and adjusted the bench to the right height. This took a moment because she was still quite short. Some people in the audience smiled at this, finding it endearing. She sat down and positioned her hands over the keys, just like she had done 1,000 times in practice. The silence in the theater was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Lily's hands hovered over the keys, ready to begin. Her parents held their breath. Mrs. Patterson stood in the wings, watching with intense anticipation. 3 seconds passed. Then another 3. Nothing happened. Lily's hands began to tremble slightly. She stared at the piano keys as if they had suddenly become completely foreign to her. The audience started to shift in their seats, uncomfortable with the unusual delay. Someone coughed. A phone buzzed somewhere in the back rows. 6 more seconds passed. The tension in the room grew thicker. Lily's face had turned pale. Her eyes were wide, and if you looked closely, you could see tears beginning to form. Her hands shook more visibly now. Then, without warning, she stood up. The piano bench scraped loudly against the stage floor. Lily turned away from the piano and ran. She didn't walk. She didn't bow. She just ran straight across the stage and disappeared behind the heavy curtain. Her footsteps echoed through the theater as she fled. The audience sat in stunned silence for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then the whispers started. They grew louder and louder until the whole theater buzzed with confused and concerned voices. Lily's mother jumped up from her seat and rushed toward the backstage area, her heels clicking rapidly against the floor. Her father followed close behind, his face showing a mixture of worry and disbelief. Mrs. Patterson stood frozen in the wings, her face pale with shock. This had never happened before in all her years of teaching. Not like this. The recital continued with other students, but nobody was really paying attention anymore. Everyone in that theater would remember this night, but not for the reasons anyone had expected. The backstage area was chaos. Lily had locked herself in one of the small practice rooms and wouldn't come out. Her mother stood outside the door, speaking softly through the wood, trying to coax her daughter to open up. Her father paced back and forth in the narrow hallway, running his hands through his hair over and over again. They had never seen their daughter like this. Inside the practice room, Lily sat curled up in the corner, her white dress bunched around her knees. She wasn't crying anymore, but her face was streaked with tears. She kept replaying those terrible seconds on stage in her mind. The silence, the stares, the feeling of everyone waiting for her to do something, and her complete inability to make her hands move the way they were supposed to. After about 20 minutes, she finally unlocked the door. Her parents rushed in and wrapped her in their arms. They didn't ask her what happened. They didn't tell her it was okay or that she could try again. They just held her, while the sounds of the continuing recital drifted faintly through the walls. The drive home that night was silent except for the sound of the car's engine and the occasional passing streetlight. Lily stared out the window at the darkness, watching the town blur past. When they got home, she went straight to her room without eating dinner. Her parents stood in the kitchen, looking at each other with worried expressions, neither of them knowing what to say. By the next morning, everything had changed in ways they never could have imagined. Someone in the audience had recorded the whole thing on their phone. The video was short, just showing Lily walking to the piano. The long, painful silence, and then her running off stage. Whoever posted it had added a caption that read, "Child prodigy has complete meltdown at recital." The video spread like wildfire. By noon, it had been shared thousands of times. By evening, it had hundreds of thousands of views. The comments section was brutal. Some people felt sorry for Lily, but many others were cruel. They said her parents had pushed her too hard. They said she was proof that child prodigies were overrated. They said she had been overhyped and couldn't handle real pressure. Local news channels picked up the story. One reporter actually showed up at their house, knocking on the door with a cameraman behind her. Lily's father told them to leave and never come back. He was shaking with anger as he closed the door. At the music academy, Mrs. Patterson was dealing with her own crisis. Several important donors had called, expressing concern about the incident. The academy's reputation was built on excellence and success. The video of Lily's stage freeze was now associated with their school, and not in a good way. Parents of other students were asking questions. Some were worried that their own children might face similar pressure. 3 days after the recital, Mrs. Patterson called Lily's parents and asked them to come in for a meeting. They knew it wasn't going to be good news. They dropped Lily off at her grandmother's house and drove to the academy in tense silence. Mrs. Patterson's office was filled with awards and photographs of successful students from over the years. She sat behind her large desk, her hands folded in front of her, wearing an expression that was difficult to read. She didn't waste time with small talk. "I'll get straight to the point," she said, her voice measured and professional. "The International Youth Piano Competition is in 6 weeks. Lily was selected to represent our academy. However, given what happened at the recital, I think it's best if we withdraw her from the competition." Lily's father felt his face grow hot. "You want her to quit?" "I want what's best for Lily," Mrs. Patterson replied coolly. "And right now, she's clearly not ready for this level of performance. The competition will have judges from around the world, media coverage, and enormous pressure. If she freezes again, it won't just affect her. It will reflect poorly on our entire academy." "She had one bad moment," Lily's mother said, her voice rising slightly. "One moment in years of perfect performances. And now you want to take away this opportunity?" Mrs. Patterson leaned back in her chair. "I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've seen many talented children come through these doors. Some of them thrive under pressure and some of them don't. What happened on that stage wasn't just nervousness. That was a complete breakdown. I can't in good conscience allow her to compete when she's clearly struggling." "We're not withdrawing her," Lily's father said firmly. "She earned that spot. She deserves to compete." Mrs. Patterson's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice. The academy has a contract with your family. Part of that contract includes a performance standards clause. It states that students representing the academy must maintain a certain level of reliability and professionalism. Lily's failure at the recital could be considered a violation of that clause." The room went silent. Lily's parents stared at Mrs. Patterson in disbelief. "Are you threatening us?" her mother asked quietly. "I'm explaining the reality of the situation," Mrs. Patterson said. "If you refuse to withdraw Lily from the competition, the academy will be forced to take legal action to protect its interests and reputation. We have sponsors who have invested significant money based on the expectation that our representatives will perform at the highest level. We can't risk another public incident." The meeting ended badly. Lily's parents left the office feeling like they had been punched in the stomach. They sat in their car in the parking lot for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. How had things gone from their daughter being celebrated as a prodigy to being threatened with a lawsuit? 2 weeks later, they received official papers. The Riverside Academy of Music was suing them for breach of contract. The lawsuit demanded that Lily be withdrawn from the competition and that her parents pay damages for the harm to the academy's reputation. The amount they were asking for was more money than Lily's parents made in an entire year. They couldn't afford a lawyer, not a good one anyway. They found an older attorney named Mr. Chen who agreed to take their case for a reduced fee because he felt the lawsuit was unjust. He was honest with them from the start. He told them that contracts were contracts and proving that the academy was wrong would be difficult. The story made the news again. This time the headlines were even worse. Piano Academy sues 8-year-old student and music school takes legal action against child prodigy. The comment sections exploded with opinions. Some people supported the academy, saying that contracts existed for a reason and that parents needed to accept when their children couldn't handle pressure. Others were outraged that a music school would sue a child over a single bad performance. Television talk shows picked up the story. Experts debated whether parents were pushing talented children too hard. Child psychologists appeared on morning programs discussing performance anxiety and childhood trauma. Lily's face was everywhere. That frozen moment on stage replayed again and again across screens around the country. Through all of this, Lily herself had gone completely silent. She hadn't touched the piano in her house since that night. The instrument sat in their living room like a piece of furniture gathering dust. Her parents would sometimes hear her standing next to it late at night, just looking at the keys, but she never sat down to play. Her mother was worried sick. She took time off work to be home with Lily, watching her daughter move through the house like a ghost. Lily barely ate. She barely spoke. She spent most of her time in her room drawing pictures. Her mother noticed that many of the drawings were of pianos. But the pianos in the pictures were always broken somehow. Keys missing. Strings snapped. One drawing showed a piano with wings flying away into the sky. The preliminary court hearing was scheduled for late April. Mr. Chen prepared them as best he could, but he warned them that the judge might side with the academy. The law didn't always care about what was fair. It cared about what was written in contracts and agreements. The night before the hearing, Lily's father sat on the edge of her bed. His daughter was staring at the ceiling, her hands resting on her stomach. "Tomorrow might be difficult," he said softly, "but no matter what happens, we love you. And none of this is your fault." Lily turned her head to look at him. For the first time in weeks, she spoke more than a few words. "Dad," she said quietly, "what if I told you that I didn't fail on that stage?" He looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "What if I told you that I heard something that night? Something different. Something that I couldn't explain to anyone because I didn't understand it myself." Her father didn't know what to say. He just squeezed her hand and told her to get some sleep. But as he left her room and closed the door behind him, he felt a small flicker of something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The courthouse was an old building downtown with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. Lily walked between her parents, holding both their hands tightly. She wore a simple blue dress and white shoes that her grandmother had polished until they shined. She looked even smaller than usual in the vast hallway filled with adults in suits carrying briefcases and folders. The courtroom itself was intimidating. Dark wooden panels covered the walls, and the judge's bench sat elevated at the front, making whoever sat there look powerful and important. There were rows of seats like church pews, and they were nearly all filled. Reporters sat in the back with notebooks and recording devices. Music teachers from the academy sat on one side. Parents who supported Lily's family sat on the other. The room buzzed with whispered conversations that stopped the moment the bailiff announced the judge's entrance. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had a reputation for being fair but tough, someone who didn't tolerate any nonsense in her courtroom. She looked over her glasses at everyone assembled and told them to sit down. The sound of everyone sitting at once echoed through the room. The academy's lawyer was a man named Mr. Wright, and he looked like he had stepped out of a television legal drama. Expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, and a way of speaking that made everything sound dramatic and important. He stood up and began presenting the academy's case with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. "Your Honor," he began, walking slowly in front of the judge's bench, "this case is about responsibility and trust. The Riverside Academy of Music is a respected institution with a 70-year history of excellence. When we accept a student, we enter into an agreement with that student's family. We provide training, resources, and opportunities. In return, we expect a certain standard of performance." He clicked a button on a remote and a screen on the wall lit up. Everyone in the courtroom watched as the video from the recital began to play. There was Lily walking across the stage. The painful silence, the visible trembling, and then her running away. Mr. Wright let the video play all the way through before pausing it on a frame that showed Lily's tearful face as she fled the stage. "This," he said, pointing at the frozen image, "is not a momentary lapse. This is a complete inability to perform under pressure. The Academy has already suffered reputational damage from this incident. The video has been viewed over 2 million times. Donors have expressed concerns. Parents have questioned our methods. And now the family wants this child to represent us at an international competition?" He walked over to his table and picked up a thick folder. "We have documentation here from child psychologists. Expert testimony that confirms what we all witnessed. This child is experiencing severe performance anxiety. Forcing her to compete would not only risk further damage to the Academy's reputation, but it could cause lasting psychological harm to the child herself." Mr. Wright called his first witness, a child psychologist named Dr. Williams, who had never actually met Lily, but had watched the video and reviewed the case. Dr. Williams sat in the witness stand, looking professional and serious in her dark suit. "Based on what I observed in the video and the background information provided," Dr. Williams said in a calm, clinical voice, "this child displays classic symptoms of acute performance anxiety. The physical trembling, the inability to begin the task, the flight response, these are all textbook indicators of someone who has been placed under more pressure than they can handle. Mr. Wright nodded along as if this confirmed everything he had been saying. And in your professional opinion, would forcing this child to compete in a high-pressure international competition be beneficial or harmful? It would be potentially very harmful, Dr. Williams replied. It could reinforce the trauma, create lasting anxiety around performance, and potentially damage her relationship with music permanently. Lily's mother squeezed her daughter's hand under the table. Lily sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, but her mind was racing with thoughts she couldn't quite organize into words. Mr. Chen, their lawyer, did his best when it was his turn. He was older and didn't have the same polished presentation style as Mr. Wright, but he spoke with genuine conviction. He called Lily's piano teacher, Miss Rodriguez, to the stand. She had taught Lily for 4 years and knew her better than almost anyone when it came to music. Lily is the most naturally talented student I've ever taught, Miss Rodriguez said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. She doesn't just play music. She understands it on a level that most adults never reach. What happened at that recital was completely out of character. In 4 years, I've never seen her nervous or anxious about performing. But when Mr. Wright cross-examined Miss Rodriguez, he was ruthless. He pulled out the program from the recital and pointed to the piece Lily had been scheduled to play. This piece, he said, is considered one of the most difficult in classical piano repertoire. Isn't it true that you were the one who suggested Lily attempt it? Miss Rodriguez hesitated. Well, yes, but... And isn't it also true that several other teachers at the academy expressed concern that the piece was too advanced for an 8-year-old child? Some did express concerns, yes, but Lily had demonstrated. So despite warnings from your colleagues, you pushed this child to attempt something that even professional pianists find challenging. And when the pressure became too much, she broke. Isn't that what really happened here? Miss Rodriguez looked like she had been slapped. She tried to explain that Lily had wanted to play the piece, that she had practiced it perfectly dozens of times, but Mr. Wright had already made his point. He thanked her and sat down, looking satisfied. The morning session ended badly for Lily's family. Judge Morrison called for a lunch recess and disappeared into her chambers. The reporters rushed out to file their stories. Lily's family sat alone at their table while the courtroom emptied around them. They went to a small cafe across the street for lunch, but nobody was hungry. Lily's father stared at his sandwich without taking a bite. Her mother kept checking her phone, reading the news articles that were already being published about the morning's testimony. Mr. Chen tried to be encouraging, but even he seemed worried about how things were going. Lily had been quiet all morning, but now she suddenly spoke up. I want to tell the judge something. Her parents looked at each other, then at Mr. Chen. The lawyer shook his head. Lily, I don't think that's a good idea. Mr. Wright would cross-examine you, and he's very good at making people say things that hurt their case. But I need to explain, Lily insisted. Nobody understands what really happened. Sweetheart, her mother said gently, what happened was that you got scared. There's no shame in that. We're not upset with you. But that's not what happened, Lily said, her voice rising with frustration. I wasn't scared. Well, I was scared, but not of playing. I was scared because I realized something and I didn't know what to do about it. Her father leaned forward. What did you realize? Lily struggled to find the words. The night before, during my last practice, I heard the music differently. Not as separate notes that you play one after another. I heard it all at once, like looking at a complete picture instead of drawing it line by line. And when I sat down on that stage, I tried to play it the normal way, but it felt wrong. It felt like trying to pour the ocean through a tiny straw. I froze because I didn't know how to make my hands do what my brain was understanding. The adults at the table stared at her in confusion. Mr. Chen scratched his head. I don't understand what you mean. I don't either, Lily admitted. But I know it's real. And I know I can prove it if the judge will let me. Her father looked at Mr. Chen. Can she testify? She can, the lawyer said slowly, but it's risky. Very risky. If she can't explain herself clearly, or if Mr. Wright manages to rattle her, it could make things worse. They sat in silence for a long moment. The cafe buzzed with lunchtime conversations around them. Someone's phone rang. A baby cried at a nearby table. Normal life continued while they wrestled with this decision. Finally, Lily's mother spoke. It's your choice, sweetheart. If you want to speak to the judge, we'll support you. But you need to understand that the other lawyer will ask you difficult questions and try to make you confused or upset. I want to try, Lily said quietly but firmly. When they returned to the courtroom, Mr. Chen requested a conference with Judge Morrison and both legal teams. They disappeared into the judge's chambers, leaving Lily and her parents sitting nervously in the courtroom. After about 15 minutes, they emerged. Judge Morrison took her seat and addressed the courtroom. I've been informed that the defendant, Lily, wishes to make a demonstration to the court. This is highly unusual, but given the unique nature of this case, I'm going to allow it. However, she looked directly at Lily. You will have exactly 3 seconds. Not more, not less. Do you understand? Lily nodded. Mr. Wright stood up immediately. Your Honor, I must object. This is clearly a stunt designed to manipulate the emotions of the court. This is a legal proceeding, not a talent show. Your objection is noted and overruled, Judge Morrison said firmly. I want to see what this child has to say. Bailiff, please bring in a keyboard. The courtroom buzzed with confused whispers as a digital piano was wheeled in and set up near the witness stand. Lily stood up from her seat, her legs shaking slightly as she walked toward it. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on her small figure. This was it. 3 seconds to prove that everything everyone thought they knew about what happened was wrong. The digital piano sat in the middle of the courtroom like it didn't belong there. It looked out of place among all the serious wooden furniture and legal documents. Lily walked toward it slowly, and you could hear every single one of her footsteps on the marble floor. The room was so quiet that someone's watch beeping in the back sounded as loud as an alarm. She didn't sit down at the piano bench. Instead, she stood beside it, which confused everyone watching. People had expected her to sit and play like normal. Her hand hovered above the keys and she looked up at Judge Morrison. You may begin, the judge said, glancing at the large clock on the wall. 3 seconds, starting now. What happened next would be talked about for years to come, replayed on news channels and social media thousands of times, analyzed by musicians and scientists alike. But in that moment, the people in the courtroom simply couldn't believe what they were seeing. Lily's hand moved so fast it was almost a blur. But she wasn't playing a melody the way pianists normally do. Her fingers struck multiple keys across different octaves simultaneously, in positions that seemed impossible for such small hands. It wasn't random noise. It was something else entirely. The sound that came out of that piano was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever heard. It was as if someone had taken an entire symphony and compressed it into a single moment. You could hear highs and lows at the same time, harmonies that seemed to exist in layers, melodies that appeared and disappeared within the same instant. It sounded both beautiful and impossible. Some people later said it felt like hearing music the way you might experience a dream, where everything happens at once and makes perfect sense even though it shouldn't. The 3 seconds ended. The sound faded. Complete silence followed, the kind of silence that feels heavy and thick. Then people started reacting. Someone gasped. Another person whispered, "What was that?" Miss Rodriguez stood up from her seat so fast that she knocked her purse onto the floor. She didn't even notice. Her hand was covering her mouth and her eyes were wide with shock. "That's impossible," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. She just played the entire piece. The whole Rachmaninoff concerto, all of it. Not the notes in order, but the harmonic structure, the emotional content. Everything that makes that piece what it is. She played it all in 3 seconds. Mr. Wright looked confused and annoyed. "Your Honor, I don't understand what we just witnessed, but whatever it was, it doesn't change the facts of this case." Judge Morrison held up her hand for silence. She was staring at Lily with an expression that was hard to read. "Miss Rodriguez, are you telling this court that what we just heard was the equivalent of a 20-minute piano concerto?" "Not equivalent," Miss Rodriguez said, walking forward without being called as a witness. The bailiff started to stop her, but Judge Morrison waved him away. It was the concerto, just not played in the way we understand music. It was vertical instead of horizontal, time compressed instead of spread out. A man in the back of the courtroom stood up. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with gray hair and glasses. "Your Honor, may I speak? I'm Professor Henderson from the State University. I teach music theory and composition." Judge Morrison looked annoyed at all the disruptions but nodded. "Go ahead, but make it brief." Professor Henderson came forward, adjusting his glasses nervously. "What this child just did is something that theoretical musicians have discussed for decades, but never actually heard performed. Mozart wrote in a letter once that he could hear entire symphonies in his mind all at once, not as a sequence of notes but as a complete entity. We always thought he was speaking metaphorically. But what if he wasn't? What if some minds can actually perceive music not as a timeline, but as a simultaneous structure? Are you saying this child is like Mozart? Mr. Wright said with clear skepticism in his voice. I'm saying she might perceive music in a way that most of us cannot even imagine, Professor Henderson replied. And if that's true, then asking her to play a piano concerto the traditional way would be like asking someone who sees in color to describe a painting using only words for black and white. The translation would be frustrating, maybe even impossible. Judge Morrison turned her attention back to Lily, who was still standing by the piano. Is this what you were trying to tell us? That you heard the music differently? Lily nodded, her voice small but clear. The night before the recital during my last practice, something changed in my head. I suddenly understood the whole piece at once. I could see how all the parts fit together, not as separate moments in time but as a single complete thing. When I sat down on that stage to play it the regular way, it felt wrong. It was like trying to describe a sunset by listing individual colors one at a time. I froze because I didn't know how to explain what I was experiencing. Her mother was crying now, tears running down her face. Not sad tears, but tears of relief and understanding. Her daughter hadn't failed. She had discovered something extraordinary and had been scared and confused, not knowing how to share it with anyone. Mr. Wright cleared his throat. This is all very interesting, but it doesn't address the fundamental issue. Whether this child experiences music unusually or not, the fact remains that she failed to perform at the recital. She has demonstrated severe anxiety under pressure. The Academy cannot risk— Mr. Wright, Judge Morrison interrupted, her voice sharp. I've been a judge for 23 years. I've presided over hundreds of cases involving children, and I've learned to recognize the difference between a child who is suffering and a child who is simply different. What I saw on that stage in the video wasn't a breakdown. It was a child struggling to communicate something she didn't have the words for. She looked down at the papers on her bench, then back up at everyone assembled in the courtroom. Let me ask you something, Mr. Wright. Your client, the Academy, claims this child has damaged its reputation. But what exactly is that reputation built on? Excellence or conformity? Mr. Wright opened his mouth to respond, but the judge continued. Because it seems to me that you had genuine excellence right in front of you, and you were so focused on traditional measures of success that you couldn't recognize it. This child didn't fail to play that concerto. She evolved beyond the traditional way of playing it. The courtroom was absolutely silent now. Even the reporters had stopped writing in their notebooks. Everyone was hanging on every word. The contract between the Academy and this family includes a performance standards clause. Judge Morrison continued, but that clause assumes performance will be measured by traditional standards. What happens when a student surpasses those standards in a way that traditional measurement can't capture? The clause becomes meaningless, Mr. Wright tried again. Your Honor, we have expert testimony from Dr. Williams about the child's psychological state. Expert testimony from someone who never met the child and based her entire analysis on a video clip, Judge Morrison said. Whereas I have just witnessed firsthand that this child is not broken or traumatized. She's brilliant in a way that your client's Academy failed to recognize or nurture. She shuffled through the papers on her bench and then looked directly at Mr. Wright. I'm dismissing this case. The Academy's lawsuit has no merit. Furthermore, I'm dissolving the performance standards clause in the contract between the Academy and this family. Miss Lily is free to pursue music in whatever way she chooses, with or without the Academy's approval. The courtroom erupted. People started talking all at once. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Lily's father pulled his wife and daughter into a hug, all three of them crying together. Mr. Wright gathered his papers quickly, his face red with either anger or embarrassment or both. Miss Rodriguez came over to Lily's family, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, she said. I should have realized something different was happening. I should have listened better. Lily's mother hugged her. You couldn't have known. We didn't know either. Professor Henderson approached them too, looking excited despite trying to maintain professional composure. I'd very much like to study what happened here if you'd be willing. Not in a way that puts pressure on Lily, but simply to understand. This could change how we think about music theory entirely. Judge Morrison banged her gavel one final time to restore order. This court is adjourned. But before she left the bench, she looked at Lily one more time. Young lady, don't let anyone tell you that different is the same as wrong. What you have is a gift. Use it however feels right to you. As they left the courthouse, news cameras were everywhere. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones were shoved toward them. But Lily's father just held his family close and guided them to their car. They didn't answer any questions. They just wanted to go home. In the car, Lily sat in the back seat looking out the window as they drove through town. For the first time in weeks, she felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She wasn't broken. She wasn't a failure. She was just different. And maybe, she thought, different was exactly what the world needed. The news spread faster than anyone could have imagined. By that evening, the video of Lily's 3-second performance in the courtroom had millions of views. But this time, the comments were completely different. People weren't mocking her or calling her a failure. They were amazed. Confused, yes, but amazed. Music experts from around the world started weighing in. A famous composer in Germany said it was the most innovative approach to music he had seen in 50 years. A neuroscientist in Japan published a paper about how some brains might process temporal information differently. Classical music websites crashed from too much traffic as people tried to understand what had happened in that courtroom. But for Lily's family, the most important thing was much simpler. Their daughter smiled again. That first night after the court hearing, Lily went to the piano in their living room. She didn't sit down right away. She just stood there, running her fingers along the keys without pressing them down. Her parents watched from the kitchen doorway, holding their breath, not wanting to interrupt. Then she sat down and played, not the 3-second compression that had shocked everyone, just a simple melody, something she made up on the spot. It was gentle and sweet, and it sounded like relief. Her mother started crying again, but this time they were definitely happy tears. The International Youth Piano Competition was still 6 weeks away, but everything about it had changed. The competition organizers called Lily's parents personally. They said she was welcome to compete in the traditional format if she wanted, but they were also open to creating a special category for innovative performance. They wanted to see what she could do without the constraints of traditional expectations. Mrs. Patterson called too, which surprised everyone. She apologized, which surprised them even more. She said she had been so focused on protecting the Academy's reputation that she had failed to see what was really happening with one of her students. She offered to reinstate Lily with no strings attached, but Lily's parents politely declined. They had found a new teacher, someone who was excited about exploring different ways of understanding music. Professor Henderson became a regular visitor to their home. He wasn't pushy or demanding. He just wanted to understand how Lily's mind worked. He would bring recording equipment and notebooks, and he and Lily would talk about music for hours. He was like a kid in a candy store discovering something he had only dreamed might be possible. "Can you teach other people to hear music the way you do?" he asked one afternoon. Lily thought about it. "I don't know. It's like asking someone to explain how they see colors. I just do. But maybe if I can figure out how to describe it better, other people might be able to learn." That conversation led to something unexpected. A technology company that made musical instruments reached out. They wanted to work with Lily to develop new kinds of instruments that could produce the layered, compressed sounds she heard in her mind. They offered to fund research and development with Lily as a consultant. Her parents were protective, making sure any arrangement would prioritize their daughter's well-being over profits. But they could see how excited Lily was about the possibility. The 6 weeks passed quickly. Lily practiced, but not the way she had before. She wasn't drilling the same piece over and over until it was perfect. She was experimenting, playing with sound, discovering what her unique way of hearing music could create. Some of it sounded beautiful. Some of it sounded strange. All of it was interesting. When competition day arrived, Lily wasn't nervous the way she had been before the spring recital. She was excited. Her whole family made the trip, including her grandmother, who kept dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, even though nothing sad had happened yet. The competition was held in a beautiful concert hall 3 hours from their home. Young pianists from all over the world had come to perform. The traditional competition went on as scheduled, with incredibly talented children playing classical pieces with technical precision. They were all amazing in their own ways, but the special exhibition performance, as they were calling Lily's segment, was scheduled for the end of the day. By the time she was set to perform, word had spread. The concert hall was packed beyond capacity. People stood in the aisles. Others watched on screens in overflow rooms. News crews from multiple countries had cameras set up. Lily walked onto the stage wearing a simple green dress. The audience applauded, but it wasn't polite applause. It was genuine, warm, encouraging. She could feel the difference. These people weren't here to judge her by traditional standards. They were here to experience something new. She sat at the grand piano and adjusted the bench. Then she looked out at the audience and did something unexpected. She spoke. "Most people experience music as something that happens across time," she said, her young voice carrying through the excellent acoustics of the hall. "You hear one note, then the next, and your brain puts them together into a song. But I hear it differently. I hear all the notes at once, like looking at a complete painting instead of watching someone paint it. What I'm going to play for you tonight is 3 minutes long, but it contains what would normally be about 40 minutes of music. I don't know if you'll understand it the way I do, but I hope you'll feel something." The audience was completely silent. Lily turned to the piano, positioned her hands, took a deep breath, and began to play. What emerged from that piano over the next 3 minutes was unlike anything the audience had ever experienced. It wasn't chaos, though. To the untrained ear, it might have seemed overwhelming at first. It was layers upon layers of melody and harmony, rhythms that existed simultaneously, emotions that shifted and evolved within single moments. Some people in the audience closed their eyes, trying to process the flood of sound. Others leaned forward, as if getting closer might help them understand better. A few had tears running down their faces without really knowing why. It was like hearing the soundtrack to a life, with all its joy and sadness and hope and fear compressed into a brief but intense experience. When the 3 minutes ended and the final notes faded away, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the entire concert hall exploded with applause. People stood up, cheering, whistling. Some were shouting brava the way audiences do at operas. The ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. Lily stood up from the piano bench and took a bow. She looked different than she had that terrible night at the spring recital. Her shoulders were back. Her head was up. She wasn't running away from anything. She was standing in exactly the right place, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Backstage afterward, musicians and composers crowded around her family. A famous concert pianist from Austria said it was the most moving performance she had experienced in her entire career. A composer from Brazil asked if he could write a piece specifically designed for Lily's unique way of playing. Offers came from music schools around the world, all wanting to study her approach, to learn from her, to help her develop this new form of musical expression. But the moment that mattered most to Lily happened later that evening. Her family went out for ice cream, just the four of them, sitting at a small table in a local shop. No reporters, no professors, no cameras, just a family celebrating together. "I'm proud of you," her father said, squeezing her hand across the table. "Me too," her mother added, "not because of what you can do with a piano, but because you stayed true to yourself even when it was hard." Her grandmother just smiled and wiped her eyes with that handkerchief again. Lily took a bite of her chocolate ice cream and looked around at her family. A few months ago, she had felt broken and lost. Now she felt found, not because she had won some competition or proven something to her critics, but because she had finally understood that being different wasn't something to fix or hide. In the following months, Lily did work with the technology company to develop new instruments. She gave lectures at universities explaining her approach to music theory. She performed at small venues around the country, always to sold-out crowds. A documentary crew followed her for a year, creating a film about her journey that would eventually be shown in film festivals. But she also did normal 8-year-old things. She played with friends, rode her bike, complained about homework, and argued with her parents about bedtime. Because at the end of the day, genius or not, different or not, she was still just a kid trying to figure out her place in the world. The piano in their living room got played every day now, but the music that came from it was never the same twice. Sometimes it was traditional melodies. Sometimes it was those compressed harmonics that only Lily could fully understand. And sometimes it was just noise, the sound of experimentation and discovery. Years later, when people asked Lily about that moment in the courtroom when everything changed, she would always say the same thing. "I didn't change in that moment. I just finally got the chance to show people who I really was." The real lesson wasn't about music at all. It was about having the courage to be yourself, even when the world expects you to be something else. And she was right. That was the real story all along.